Hey, Posse fam, Emma and Kate here. We're just coming to you today with episode 2 of The Spark. And in this episode, we're just going to talk about all the production and stage settings and stuff like that. Obviously, disclaimer, this is just our views. We don't know what is actually going to happen. It's our opinion, looking through the book, from speaking with Jimmy and JC, from just everything that we have collectively learned about this. And it's definitely going to change. But we just thought it'd be fun to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I think, just imagine walking into the stage. Finally, it's on stage. It's time to go see it on Broadway or West End or wherever it ends up being. Imagine what you're going to see. When you sit down, got the playbill, everything's getting ready. And I think it's going to be, honestly, I feel like when the curtains open, it's just going to be breathtaking because I think it's going to be simple. I don't think it's going to be, anything super massive, high end. I think it's going to be kind of simple. I think it will be um, more detailed probably than what Playing with Fire, Barbara Field's version, how they had that kind of laid out. I think it'll be more than that, but I think it'll still, so I think it would be really cool. And obviously, we don't know how it's going to begin, but I think it'd be really cool to have a very simple graveyard, have Elizabeth's grave, kind of front and center. Um, Obviously, I feel at least like this is how the world ends will be just the very beginning. That the musical will begin by the lights going down in the house, and then all of a sudden you'll have Elizabeth and she'll sing this song, and then you'll have at one point Adam, and then at one point Victor. They all join in the song, and then I think it'd be cool if just everything goes dark and just one single light comes up over the grave with a creature standing there, but his back to the audience. So you don't see him. You just see this hunched over figure. And then you have, Victor or well, Frankenstein come out a little bit later. And then the dialogue begins. And then when he turns, you can see just how done up they make the creature to look, how to make him this kind of hideous but not hideous, kind of character. I know at one point Jimmy said to kind of give him this bad boy image. So I think it'd be really interesting to see how all that plays out. But I think the setting and the overall theming of the musical could be really interesting. I'm kind of curious to see what they do, how they, because I know what in the original script, I think it says that they have like kind of like two levels, and all the stuff that's happening in the present moment is down below. Everything that's flashback is up above. And I kind of want to see, like, are they going to keep that, or are they going to go just a completely different route? Like
Yeah,
what are
and
they going
that's
to
it.
do?
We don't know. I mean, like, my vision is completely different to your vision. Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously, there's going to be, creature and that there, but like, I think when I imagine it, I'm mainly focused on Elizabeth, and
Yeah.
just like that spotlight on her, and then bringing them in and stuff. So I think everybody just does everything like a little bit differently, and I think that's what the good part of having this conversation, and just getting to explore all those different aspects of what we think is going to be, it's going to look like. I mean, I agree, graveyard, if they keep the graveyard,
Yeah.
which I
I hope
kind of
they
hope they
do.
do. Yeah, I hope they do.
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's going to be so just more memorable and more iconic and catching to the eye, and people can resonate with it more. So I just feel like
Right.
that's a really good place to keep it about them, and I hope they keep the graveyard.
Agreed.
And I think it's just good. I think it's just the perfect thing to start the musical, and for that
Oh
song
yeah.
to just set the scene and tell the story of where they are. It it's just going to be iconic. I see a lot
I
of
think it'd be
lights, a
beautiful.
lot of different lighting changes,
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah, and whoever's got to fill Lily's shoes on that opening song, like,
Oof.
yeah,
I feel like all the songs, just whoever ends up taking any of those roles, just wow. Like
yeah,
the vocals that you're gonna have to fill, whether it's Lily's role, whether it's Cardi's role, whether it's JC's role, like that they're all three of them are insanely talented. And I'm
yeah,
like, I'm not saying that anybody, is gonna be terrible, but like
no.
those are some big shoes to fill. And I think whoever they pick, they'll do a great job, but I'm glad it's not me that has to make that decision, like who you
Oh,
pick,
I know
because
that they're going to do
oh,
a great job, because I know that they're not going to settle for anything less than great.
oh
Um,
no.
and you can. I know there's like this whole sort of, well, you've got to pick either acting or a good singer, but there are amazing actors out there. that are amazing singers, you know.
Oh,
So
definitely.
it's about finding the right balance for each character.
I think it'll be a lot. Like when you get to actually see it, oh man, it's gonna be so good.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I'm
definitely.
ready.
Take me there, you know, like
Exactly. So obviously, we know that the original play and everything was set up in the Arctic, and then you guys changed it to the graveyard. What was your reasoning? Why did you decide to go ahead and change the location?
Um, I could change back, honestly, but we sort of like the idea of it being at like Elizabeth's grave, because it is sort of like a menage a trois, like, ultimately between these three characters. And, um, you know, and it's three, it's three tragic characters. Any one of them at any time could have like stopped all the nonsense, but they just couldn't get it together to do that. So it was like, and I think that, I don't know, it just felt like, oh, then you kind of like, it made sense for the opening a little bit more. And it's like, it just didn't, it was fun to change it up.
and that's what I'm excited to sort of see, like the differences between what we think now and what is gonna be.
Oh
And
yeah.
because there is a lot of differences between, Barbara's book and Playing with Fire that we already know about. We know that it's in a graveyard instead of the Arctic, and there's some things that we don't know yet. Maybe JC and Jimmy don't know yet. um, but and even if they do, it's probably could change. Um, but
Definitely.
like things like, is it going to still be summer solstice? Barbara's book has Elizabeth's lullaby in it. Is that going to continue through? And stuff like that. So just finding those differences and things, I think, is going to be really impactful for the staging itself.
Oh, agreed. And I mean, like in compared to Barbara's too, they leave out an entire character that
Yeah.
they've said, that they're kind of having Elizabeth fill that role. But it'll be interesting to see how, what does she do? Because you have all these scenes where, Victor's talking to his professor and he's like, oh, nothing's going on and whatever. And like secretly, obviously, a lot's going on.
Yeah,
So it'll be
you
interesting
really
to see.
see the inside of Victor's like personality and mind in that with the
Yeah.
professor, and we wouldn't have got that in Barbara's book without the professor because none of the other characters were there. So I think it was really smart to bring Elizabeth
Yeah.
to the
And I think it'll be interesting to see
university and
how
see
they
that.
use her.
Yeah,
Yeah, like how they use her to kind of flush out his character is, I think, will be really interesting. Because, I mean, she obviously is in Barbara's book a good amount, but I
hmm
mean, definitely not as much as she will be, in this
yeah,
version. And I think it'll just be interesting to see kind of making her role bigger,
yeah,
what that does. What kind of scenes are we going to see that just based on Barbara's book don't exist? So
yeah.
how they pull these scenes and make it happen with Elizabeth could be really interesting. Like
No,
I
I love it.
think
Yeah,
it'll be
I love
good.
it. I
I do
think
too.
I think bringing Elizabeth's time into the piece up and sort of getting rid of the professor, I feel like it just keeps it about those three. Like it's
Right.
back to them rather than diluting the conversation more. It's still really focused on those three and what their experiences are.
Exactly. And I think it'd be good to bring Elizabeth in more because it's like, in the original version, obviously all this stuff is going on with him and his professor. And I think
hmm
it'd be interesting to see, like, this is the person you want to marry. This is the person you're spending forever with. And you're kind of like, oh, you're being a little shady. What's going on? Just makes sense to have her and kind of her views, and the whole like what's happening. And then of course, I mean, if you look at like 1/r², part one and
hmm
part two, the difference there. And
Yeah,
it's like imagine what happens in between those two versions on stage, and
yeah,
having this whole her realizing what's going on and her being like, you created a monster. Like, what have you done? And and that kind
yeah,
of thing. Like you are so obsessed that you're doing that. And like, I can see almost like not necessarily a literal, yelling fighting match, but there's like that tension. And I think,
hmm
adding that you wouldn't have if they kept the professor in just makes it more relatable in some ways. And in just in other ways, yeah, it's just focusing on a love story that honestly has so much toxicity to it that like I think that would make it more interesting. And who hasn't had a toxic relationship? We've all been there. So,
we feel her
exactly.
pain.
We're
Like,
all
yeah.
like, Elizabeth, girl, like listen to us. And yeah, I think like that'll just be, to me, I think, yeah, like the character, if they had left in the professor, like you said, it kind of dilutes what's going on. And I think nothing personal to the professor, but I think leaving them out was probably their best idea.
Yeah, and that's it. Like for Barbara's book, I love the professor. I love that, he's there and
Oh, yeah.
we get to see that side of Frankenstein through the professor at that point in his life, because we wouldn't have seen that otherwise. However, for Playing with Fire, it's just not relevant.
Right.
And it's not needed. And I think, it misses the main point by bringing him in. And I think it's my personal opinion is that they don't need him. And they obviously felt the same way,
I mean, nothing personal to him, but yeah, agreed. And I think like there's just so much going on between the three characters, like not counting the professor, that it would take away, from everything going on with them and the story that you're really trying to tell. That's almost like, I mean, it plays into the story, but it's almost like secondary. And I think you kind of need that more focus on the primary. And I think they do a really good job of doing that. And I think when it gets this on stage and everything, I think they'll continue, really focusing on what's important.
I mean, that's it. Like, I mean, Jimmy did say, he could be brought back. Maybe, who knows? Obviously, anything could happen right now. Like, literally anything could happen. Probably draw the line at spaceships and elephants entering the picture. But other than that, pretty much anything's a go, right? So
at least maybe the spaceship.
yeah. Who knows really what's going to happen. But I mean, some things that we do know is that a lot of the staging is going to be around like the story being told and then having flashbacks happening at the same time.
Obviously, when we listen to the album, like for us, a lot of the songs kind of feel like when we envision how it's going to look on stage, that there's going to be a lot of flashbacks. For example, when you have things like the animation, you could have a flashback going on in the corner of Adam's creation, or, Death of the Brides. You have the creature and Frankenstein in the corner, they're singing about it, they're upset. And you can see Adam and Victor off to the side, going through this whole scene. So for you, obviously, again, we don't know what staging or anything's going to look like. That's going to come in the future. But for you personally, like, do you like kind of plan this idea that you're going to see a lot of flashbacks, or are you going to go up? Would you rather go in a completely different direction?
It is like, anything that Victor, Elizabeth, with the exception of the first song, and Adam are singing, they're all flashbacks. So it's like, I mean, the premise of like, the piece really is like creature and Frankenstein are sitting on the couch watching a video, not literally, but they're like watching the past together so they can understand it. They're both looking at everything so they understand why they did what, and that's how they come to understand each other, and you get some sort of resolution for it. So yeah, and that's it's also the tricky part about how do you present those flashbacks,
Yeah.
It's like and how that's a whole other part of the beast, but it's our beast.
And I think flashbacks, I mean, you literally cannot tell this story without flashbacks. I feel like it's impossible. You have to see, how did we get to this point? How did we even decide that we wanted to make a creature? What made him want to do this? And then you get to that point and it's like, well, let's see, because I think a lot of flashbacks, not only are they telling you how we got to this point, but it's also showing you feelings that you may not have gotten otherwise. Like, for example, with like the part that will probably most likely go with the animation. Like, we obviously know he built creature, and we obviously know in Frankenstein's mind that building creature was the right choice, that he did what he needed to do. But I feel like when you look at the song, you really get to feel the creature being like, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want you to make me. This this was you doing something and you didn't think twice about, you know, your reasons and the consequences and all of that. And I feel like if you don't have that flashback, you wouldn't see, because I picture like in the animation, for example, Adam being on this table and, you know, coming to life and seeing, you know, Victor standing there and thinking like, oh, you're going to be this person who's going to love me and care about me. And then seeing, you know, Victor have this look of horror and like, oh my gosh, what did I make? And you see the abandonment happen that you know has happened, but to see it played out is just going to make it a lot more emotional to see, you know,
For
like
sure.
I picture like Adam like trying to reach for him and Victor just being like, nope, and like running away and leaving him kind of behind on this table, like, well, now what? And, you know, really hurt and upset. And I feel like you, without the flashback, you wouldn't get that. You wouldn't get, you know, Adam's side of the story. So I think you have to have them. Like, there's no way you could do this musical with no flashbacks. It wouldn't elicit the emotional response that you
Yeah.
obviously want people to, the audience to have.
Yeah, for
That'll
sure.
be
And
good.
I think, you know, you have to tell the story. And the only way that they can be explaining the story whilst having this current present day conversation is by those flashbacks. And again, I think you're right, building up the reasons why Frankenstein did what he did. And obviously we know that that's like the mother childbirth with his mother situation. But I feel like you're going to see a lot more of the trauma through it and why it's still haunting him and why he did that. And, you know,
Right.
and then you've got poor creature who, you know, made a lot of mistakes too, but really didn't have a choice because he had to figure things out by himself. Like, you know, there was no guidance or father
Right.
figure to come and tell him what to do and how to do it. And yeah, like everybody's been there. Everyone's had, you know, been rejected. Everybody's, you know, lost somebody. Everybody's had trauma of some kind in their life. But to see it played out in like a real way, like a musical does, like I think that those are the moments that are really gonna like hit you pretty hard. Like, you
Oh
know,
yeah. Those are parts that are going to be your relatable, where like
mhm,
you forget creature's a monster and, you know, like just made, you know, like a manufactured thing. You see him now and you're like, oh, he's very human. You know, it humanizes
yeah,
him. And I think that's, you know, also that's the whole point, is that by the end of the musical, you're not looking at Creature as this monster that was just made for convenience. You're looking at him as a person and having, you know, real feelings, real emotions, and just really lonely and all that. And then by the end,
yeah,
you feel really bad for him. And I think, you know, you have to have these reasons. You know, you have these little flashbacks, you have these little scenes happening to
mhm,
show like, look, he was made without even wanting to be made. Then he wanted somebody, you know, he wanted a companion and he thought he was getting one and he had all this excitement of, oh, I'm going to get, you know, my better half basically. And then it got taken away literally in front of his eyes and, you know, all this stuff. And it's like, if you don't see those scenes, you're not going to understand, you know, the life he lived and the things he
yeah,
went through and being, you know, rejected by all of the society. Like, I hope they leave the scene. I mean, again, we don't know what they're going to do, but I'm kind
yeah,
of hoping like the whole scene with the man, like the blind man and his son and all that. And
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I want that to stay so bad because it was like, that was the only point where a creature has like kind of a sense of belonging. He's like, oh, I found somebody who, you know, is cool with me and he's happy. And then he
for a
gets
little while.
discovered.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Like he's happy for like that brief. And it almost makes it worse because it's like he got a taste of what being normal, you know, this normal lifestyle, people caring about you and all this. And then they, of course, have, you know, other people that are like, oh my God, have you seen this guy? Like, no, no, no. You know, they're all scared of him. They shoo him away. And it was only that blind man who accepted him. And then he lost that. And I feel like those kinds of things build his character. And like, you have to show these moments because it explains. Because if you just
mhm,
did, you know, Frankenstein and the creature talking in the present, you'd miss out on so much. There'd be so many
yeah,
questions you would have. Whereas all those flashbacks will really get
yeah.
you to why things are the way they are.
I think so. And I think, you know, controversially, maybe, I don't know if it's controversial, but I also don't think of Frankenstein as the monster by the end. Like, I feel like everybody makes mistakes. I feel like they're just two people that have, you know, gone through so much trauma and not had the support, not had made the right decisions, not had the right people there to, build them up, that
Oh
they've
yeah.
gone down these wrong paths, and situations happen and people make mistakes. But, by the end, Frankenstein takes responsibility. He realizes his mistakes. He understands, and he wants to connect with Creature again. And Creature's done terrible things too, for similar reasons, for trauma, for hurt, for pain, for the want of connections with somebody. And they both are pretty even and human,
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. It's like, yeah, in the beginning, you're like, when I was reading the script, I was just like, oh my gosh, like Frankenstein's a horrible person. And in the beginning, he really is. Like 100% would agree that the things he was doing were very selfish,
Oh, so
very
selfish.
self-pleasing. Like, this is for my benefit and all that. And he didn't care what happened to Creature. He was like, cool, I
Or
got,
even what Elizabeth wanted. It was all about
yeah,
what
so
he wanted. Yeah.
nobody but himself, basically. And like, you see this evolution as as the musical goes on, of like, okay, he wasn't the best person, but first you get this understanding of why he did what he did, and you're like, okay, so maybe not the right approach, but there's at least some understanding of where his thought, because he was thinking in his mind, I don't want to lose Elizabeth, so I'm going to do whatever I can to basically give her immortality. And it's like, okay, but you're a human, and like, you can't do that. None of us live forever. This is not going to work. But in his mind, he didn't care. Rationale, logic, all that went away. And by the end, yeah, it's like he realizes that you're right. Nobody lives forever. And hey, I wasted all these years, treating you terribly, and you're not a bad person. You're somebody I made. I should have supported you. And like, he's learning, because like at one point he asks Creature, like, well, how did you survive, basically, and he's telling him all these stories of what he did. And I think it kind of made him realize, oh, like, that's kind of impressive, that you have made it this long, basically, and all this. And like, I think he starts to, yeah, genuinely have remorse. And I think that's one of the reasons too, I really hope they don't remove the graveyard as the setting, is because I like it centering around Elizabeth's grave, because I feel like it's a perfect setting when you're discussing their remorse. Like, they both feel bad because, she kind of tried to tell Victor, like, you shouldn't be doing this. And, he didn't listen and all that. So he probably has some remorse that he didn't listen to her. And because he didn't listen to her, she had this untimely death. And it was his fault, really. And then, you've got Creature, who's the one who obviously killed her. And of course, then there's that remorse that he's like, look, I stooped too low. I did something I shouldn't have done. But this is why, it's like they're understanding why both people did what they did. But a lot of it does center around her. And I feel like forgiveness and remorse being a thing right there at her grave, just, it seems so perfect. Like, not that the Arctic is bad, but when so much of it really centered around her, it just kind of seems like just the perfect location.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree. And I think that there's certain scenes and there's certain things that are going to have massive impact on it. Like,
definitely.
because obviously Creature kills William. And, that sort of starts, like, Frankenstein abandoning him starts the toing and froing. But, then there's William. Then there's, the bride situation, and where
Right.
Frankenstein destroys the bride. And then there's Elizabeth's situation where Elizabeth, meets her untimely end. And then there's this big moment. And I don't know, I just think that there's so much that you're just going to be like in absolute shock and awe, and you're going to be right there with them following this roller coaster of a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're going to walk
Agreed.
out of that theater just like, what? Just what? Just give me some time to process, because oh my goodness,
Right. I feel like I felt that way just listening to the album, which is just the music, adding in visuals and all of that. Oh, it's gonna be like, I'm gonna walk out and be like, all right, I'm gonna go sit in a quiet closet now and just like process what just happened, because it's gonna be amazing, but it's gonna be an epic emotional roller coaster, like, for sure. But I'm looking forward to it.
I think some of the other points to bring up is really, and we discussed this with Jimmy, which they'll see, but we don't really know what the time period is of the piece. And, they explained that they don't really know yet either. And I guess there's so many things about it, because it could be relevant in any time period. So that was my question. Like, because like Broken, I mean, all of the whole play, but Broken could be in the 1800s. It could be in the 1900s. It could be
Oh yeah.
now, because it's stuff like that is still happening now. So for me, like, placing it in a time period is something that I struggle a little with, because it's so timeless. And so, like,
Right.
finding out how that's gonna look, and how what sort of lane they're gonna take with that is gonna be really interesting as well.
Agreed. Because I think like when I read the script with obviously nothing else going on, what I pictured was like older, like 1800s, like older kind of thing, because obviously childbirth and that at that point was very different than it is now. And a lot of women did die in it. And I figured like, okay, that makes sense. And then we saw the artwork that's, for the upcoming graphic novel and all that. And I was like, well, that seems a little more modern, not, present day, but maybe
Mhm.
more like 19 somethings, more like 1900s, early 1900s, something like that. And so then I kind of leaned towards that. Then I'm not going to lie, the cover art, when I saw them like Playing with Fire cover art, like for the album,
Mhm.
for me, for some reason, the font choices and everything, and this could be like the PR brain going off, but like the font choices and that to me seemed very modern, very edgy.
Yeah.
And to me, then that took on a more modern feel. And I was like, well, maybe they'll do it more present day, not necessarily completely present day, but, more in like this era and that.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, so now it's like 3 different ideas in my head that it kind of does make me question. Yeah, like costuming and all that kind of stuff. What look are we going to be going for? Are we going to be
Yeah.
going for old, traditional, or more modern?
Because
Which will be
generally
interesting.
the story as a whole is timeless, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah, absolutely.
technology is timeless, emotion is timeless, relationships are timeless, love, betrayal, it's all timeless. So it
Oh
can
yeah.
be anywhere. So I feel like that's why it's the biggest, like, thing that's playing in my mind, because you just, until we go and see it, like, we're just not gonna know. And
Exactly.
like, when you read Barbara's book, of like, you do go to that, because that's the time period it was set in. Like, that's what it was meant to
You
be
automatically.
for that book. But obviously, Playing with Fire is a new entity, and so yeah, it's going to be really cool to sort of see what they do with it and where they go
Yeah.
with it from there.
So do you have like a time period in mind for this, or is it more of a timeless thing?
That's a great question. And I think, obviously, like some of it, we don't know yet. I mean, I think partly it lives in the 19th century, but maybe other parts don't. It doesn't necessarily have to be. I don't think it's going to be like a literal, like, kind of, here we are, it's the 1850s and let's go, or the 1830s or whenever it was. It won't be. I think it's going to be postmodern, so there'll be drips and drabs of everything in it. In my my fantasy of it, but I, could come
Because I
back with
think
this.
that's like, obviously when we all listen to the music or we've read interviews where you've discussed bits of this before and stuff like that, we've all got our own images in our head of what it's sort of going to be. And I think the one I struggle with the most is placing that timeline for Broken, because obviously in the book, and Broken's one of my absolute favorites, ugly tears every time. But
It's a banger. Yeah, I mean, we're really, that song took the longest to write, but we're so proud of that one. But yeah, it does. But like, I mean, in a certain sense, Broken, we is a song that could live anywhere because it's going on right now. You know what I mean? So I don't think it's like necessarily. It's not so confined by time, and like, I don't know. I don't, there's no hard answers for that either yet, but it's certainly fun to talk about and think about it. But
I can't wait to see
but
how it turns out. Anyway,
that's going to be the like a lot of that's going to be the designer. They're seeing too.
yeah,
Play into. But we're thinking, there's going to be a lot of movement in it. We see like a lot of dance, and it's going to be, probably some contemporary dance for some songs and contemporary movement. So,
That'll be really cool.
that
That'll be cool to see for sure.
yeah. Especially for You Used to Touch Me. I think that one's going to be quite epic on stage.
I feel like they have such a different view on the characters. So, like, obviously, Creature has always been this monster, and he's ugly, and he's scarred, and he's bits and pieces of flesh sewn together that look like that. But, JC and Jimmy have said multiple times that they don't see him as ugly. They see him as, different and odd and a bit of a recluse, but also, quite charming in a bad
Right.
boy kind of way that can seduce people into getting what he wants from them.
Well, I love like when we asked Jimmy, like who he would cast, if he could pick a dream cast, whatever. And he was talking about like Post Malone, for example, with all the tattoos and things
the
like
guy
that. And I
from
was
The
like,
Weeknd, yeah.
yeah. And I was like, this makes sense. Like I can kind of see what he's saying because it's like, yeah, we all were automatically picturing him not like the Green Monster, from the back in the day, but still like this kind of rough, and obviously the graphic novel illustrations that we've seen kind of still have him with the scars and the stitching, but also more, the tattoos and the scruff and, this more humanized version, not the Green Monster of the past. It'll be very interesting to see like whoever they obviously have actually playing that role, when it gets to stage, how are they going to do it? How are they going to have this person look? Like, is it going to be somebody who's maybe a very attractive person, but has scars, or something that like, cause something that would just be enough to, make them look a little bit different than a normal person, and how different are they going to go? How, simple is it going to be versus how maybe over the top they go, like it'll be very interesting to see, how they play out, especially Creature. Cause the other two, I mean, they're humans, they're going to look like humans, but like, what level do you take with a monster? How it'll look would be very interesting. And again, too, with the time periods could be interesting because, if it's more modern, you could have, the leather jacket and the kind of like bad boy edgy, the chains and the, that kind of thing. Whereas obviously it's like the 1800s, you're not going to have that. Yeah. So it could be I'm very interested. Like, I'm going to be very curious. I want to pick their brains because I don't think they even know yet. That's the thing, they're still working on getting that team. They're still working on like the book writer and all of that. And they could sit down with the book writer and go, ooh, I like this idea better, and completely change something. We don't know. Even when the graphic novel comes out, that doesn't mean that's 100% for sure what you're going to see on the stage. So it'll be really interesting
and
just to see even how their thought process changes too.
And that's it. Because like, even with the graphic novel, we're not going to see like stage directions. It's not going to be the whole book of the whole musical because, it'd be silly to give it away now. But like, we're not going to know everything. It's going to be a condensed version of just their thoughts and sort of like connecting the dots a little bit,
Right.
And so I do feel like that's like, for me, like those little things, because you know me, those little things, like Elizabeth's lullaby, and his mother's screaming throughout and stuff like that, like all those little bits, they're the things that I want to just like pick apart and see what's going where. And because,
and it can again, it can change too, because even what you see in the graphic novel is being written as what went through Jimmy and JC's minds to write Playing with Fire. But as they're doing things, they might be like, oh, you know what if we do this instead? Or, they make little changes. We're not going to see those until you see the final piece. And there could be 10 changes in between that we're never going to see, that are just thoughts they're having back and forth. And so I think, it'd be really interesting to see what gets added, what gets taken, because maybe they add in like background sounds that weren't even in Barbara's book, but it just makes sense for that moment, the way they have it written, or they take stuff out, or.
And, when you're writing something to when it's actually being performed on stage, what will carry over and what won't, and what needs to be changed so that the audience can actually understand and grasp the fact of what you're doing, is completely different to how you would write it in a book. Like
Agreed.
creature looks at the gun. Well, you have to show that happening. Like, do you get the spotlight on it? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so much that goes into it. I mean, they've got a lot of work ahead of them, bless them. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't wait for it.
But they'll do amazing. We know they
Of
will.
course they will.
Without a
Yeah,
doubt.
we've got full faith in them.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it'll just be, I mean, the whole thing, you know, to see the full culmination of everything, all the work they've been putting into it is just going to be amazing. And I think it'll be really fun to sit down one day and kind of say, okay, so we looked at the script and then we looked at the concept album and then we looked at the graphic novel. Now here we are with it on stage, and to look back at how everything has evolved, how everything's
Glad
changed.
that we get to follow along on this journey and just support it and be there and share what we can and keep that
Exactly.
conversation going. And I would be really interested to hear other people's opinions and views on what they think, you know,
Yeah.
things are going to look like, because I want to have that conversation with people. So get in the comments, guys.
Exactly. Just let us know. I mean, yeah, like, do you agree with us? Do you think we're so off the mark? Because you know what? We probably are. We do that a lot. But, you know, just talk and see what's going. And that's the most important thing, I think, is as long as everybody just keeps talking, you know, discussing anything, because the more we're talking about it, the more it's getting out there, more people are hearing, the more people are going, you know, getting interested. And it'll be very interesting later to look back at these conversations and just see, where are we at? What did we say that was absolutely spot on? What did we say that came out completely different, or anywhere in between? You know, like that'll be a fun little thing for us to look back on as years go by, even, because obviously, as we know, this is a process, a long process. So, you know, we'll be talking plenty in between now and when it actually hits the stage, and it'll be fun. It'll be a good way to look back. So, you know, don't be afraid to talk to us, comment, DM us, whatever you feel like. We'd love to hear what everybody has to say.